The judge's gavel didn't just sound like a ruling, it sounded like a funeral bell for Elena's life. Or at least, that's what her ex-husband thought. You see, in the sterile air of courtroom 4B in Manhattan, everyone was laughing. The high-priced lawyers, the spectators, even the man who had sworn to love her forever. They were all laughing at the penniless housewife wearing a thrift store dress. They called her a parasite. They called her a failure. They thought they were witnessing the destruction of a weak woman. But they forgot one thing. True power doesn't scream, it whispers. And the woman standing in that dock wasn't just Elena, the housewife. She was the most powerful person in the room. And she was about to teach them a lesson that money can't buy. The fluorescent lights of the New York State Supreme Court buzzed with a low, irritating hum, a fitting soundtrack for the headache that was splitting Julian Thorne's skull. But despite the annoyance, Julian checked his reflection in the dark screen of his phone and smiled. He looked impeccable. The navy blue Brioni suit, custom-tailored to fit his athletic frame, cost more than the car his soon-to-be ex-wife had arrived in. He glanced across the aisle. There she was. Elena. She sat with her shoulders hunched, staring at her hands. She was wearing that beige cardigan he hated, the one that had started to pill at the elbows. Her hair was pulled back in a messy, practical bun, and she wore zero makeup. To the world, she looked like exactly what his lawyer was currently painting her to be, a washed-up, dependent woman who had lost her spark years ago. Your Honor, Sophia Sterling's voice cut through the room like a serrated knife. Sophia wasn't just Julian's lawyer. She was the reason for this divorce, a partner at Sterling, Vance and Associates. She was everything Elena wasn't, sharp, vicious, and draped in designer silk. Sophia paced in front of Judge Harrison, her heels clicking a rhythmic beat of dominance. We are looking at a clear case of parasitic attachment. My client, Mr. Thorne, is a self-made man. He built Thorne Logistics from the ground up. He works 80-hour weeks. Meanwhile, Mrs. Thorne hasn't held a taxable job in 5 years. She claims she contributed to the household, yet the house was cleaned by staff paid for by Mr. Thorne. The food was cooked by chefs paid for by Mr. Thorne. Sophia paused for effect, turning to look directly at Eleanor with a sneer that didn't reach her cold, blue eyes. And now, Sophia continued, gesturing theatrically, she demands 50% of his assets. 50% of an empire she had no hand in building. It is not just legally baseless, Your Honor, it is morally offensive. A ripple of murmurs went through the gallery. Julian's friends were in the back row, mostly junior executives and investment bankers who idolized him. They snickered. One of them whispered, loud enough to be heard, "Gold digger." Julian leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs. He felt a surge of triumph. This was going exactly as planned. He had offered Elena a settlement 3 months ago, a small apartment in Queens and $2,000 a month for 2 years. A pittance, considering his net worth was estimated at $45 million. She had refused. She had said she wanted what was fair. Fair, Julian thought, suppressing a laugh. Fair is what you earn, darling, and you've earned nothing. Mrs. Thorne, Judge Harrison spoke, his voice weary. He was an older man who had seen thousands of divorces, and he looked ready for lunch. Your counsel has yet to arrive. Do you intend to represent yourself against one of the city's top firms? Elena stood up slowly. Her movements were stiff. My lawyer is running late, Your Honor. Traffic on the FDR drive. Sophia laughed, a short, sharp bark. Traffic? Or perhaps he realized this case is a lost cause? Your Honor, we move for a summary judgment. This is a waste of the court's time. Mrs. Thorne clearly cannot afford proper representation because she has no income, no savings, and no prospects. I have representation, Elena said, her voice soft, barely carrying over the gallery's whispers. "Who?" Julian spoke up for the first time, his voice dripping with condescension. "That strip mall lawyer you consulted last week, the one who specializes in slip-and-fall accidents. Elena, give it up. Take the settlement. Stop embarrassing yourself." "I'm not embarrassed, Julian," Elena said, finally lifting her head. For a second, just a fraction of a second, Julian felt a chill. Elena's eyes were usually warm, a soft hazel that pleaded for affection. But today, they were hard. Dark, like the surface of a deep ocean where light couldn't reach. Sophia stepped between them, breaking the eye contact. "Your Honor, look at the financial affidavit. Mrs. Thorne lists her occupation as freelance writer. Her total declared income last year was less than $12,000. Julian Thorne's company just closed a deal with the Horizon Group worth $15 million. The disparity is laughable. She is asking for alimony to fund a lifestyle she is too lazy to earn." "Lazy?" Elena whispered. "Yes, lazy!" Sophia shouted, sensing the kill. She turned to the gallery, playing to the crowd. While Mr. Thorne was securing international shipping routes, Mrs. Thorne was likely browsing Pinterest and drinking wine, and now she wants half? It's extortion. The gallery erupted in laughter again. Julian smirked, shaking his head as if he were the victim of a great tragedy. "Order!" Judge Harrison banged the gavel. "Ms. Sterling, tone it down." "I apologize, Your Honor," Sophia said, not looking sorry at all. "But the facts remain. We are offering a generous settlement. If she refuses, we will petition for her to receive nothing and pay legal fees." Elena remained standing. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just reached into her battered leather tote bag, a bag Julian had told her to throw away months ago because it looked poverty-stricken, and pulled out a single manila folder. "I don't want your money, Julian," Elena said clearly. The room went silent. Julian blinked. "Excuse me?" "I don't want the alimony," she repeated. "And I don't want the apartment in Queens." Sophia narrowed her eyes. "Then what are we doing here? Are you withdrawing your petition?" "No," Elena said. She placed the folder on the defense table. It looked thin, insignificant. "I'm here to clarify the assets, because, you see, you've made a mistake in your valuation." Julian laughed out loud this time. "A mistake? My accountants are from Deloitte. They don't make mistakes, Elena. I'm worth 45 million plus. It's all declared." "I'm not talking about your assets, Julian," Elena said, her voice suddenly losing its tremor. The softness was gone. The hesitation was gone. The posture of the defeated housewife vanished, replaced by a spine of steel. "I'm talking about mine," Sophia scoffed. "Yours? What assets? The 2014 Honda Civic." Elena checked her watch, a cheap plastic digital watch. "Actually, my counsel should be walking through those doors right about now." The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open with a dramatic thud. Everyone turned. Julian expected to see some disheveled, sweaty public defender. Sophia expected nobody. Instead, 3 men walked in. They were wearing charcoal grey suits that whispered Savile Row. They moved in a phalanx, carrying leather briefcases that cost more than Julian's entire wardrobe. The man in the center was older, with silver hair and a face that anyone who read the Wall Street Journal would recognize instantly. Julian's breath hitched in his throat. He grabbed Sophia's arm. "Sophia, isn't that—" Sophia went pale. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The silver-haired man walked past the stunned gallery, past Julian, past Sophia, and stopped in front of Eleanor. He didn't bow, but he nodded with a deference that sent a shockwave through the room. "Apologies for the delay, ma'am," the man said. The helicopter had trouble landing on the helipad due to the wind. "It's fine, Marcus," Eleanor said coolly. Judge Harrison leaned forward, squinting over his glasses. "Mr. Marcus Stone, the managing partner of Vanguard Legal?" Marcus Stone was a legend. He didn't handle divorces. He handled mergers for nations. He represented royalty. He cost $5,000 an hour just to talk on the phone. "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus Stone said, placing his briefcase on Eleanor's table. "I am here to represent my client, Mrs. Eleanor Vance Thorne." "You have got to be kidding me," Julian whispered, sweat suddenly prickling his forehead. "Elena, how the hell did you afford Marcus Stone?" Elena turned to Julian. The mask was fully off now. There was no love in her eyes, only a terrifying, cold amusement. "I didn't hire him, Julian," she said softly. "He's on retainer. He works for my company." To understand the silence that fell over the courtroom, you have to understand the history. You have to understand how Julian Thorne, a man who prided himself on knowing everything, had spent 5 years living with a stranger. 5 years ago, Julian had met Elena in a coffee shop in Brooklyn. She was working on a laptop, wearing oversized glasses and a paint-stained sweater. He was an up-and-coming logistics manager, hungry and ambitious. She seemed simple, sweet, uncomplicated. He had approached her because she looked like someone who would support him, not someone who would challenge him. Julian didn't want a partner. He wanted an audience. "I'm a writer," she had told him on their first date. "I tell stories." "That's cute," he had replied, patting her hand. "Does it pay the bills?" "It gets by," she had smiled. He never asked what kind of stories. He never asked who published them. He assumed she wrote blogs or cheap romance novels. When they got married 6 months later, he insisted on a prenuptial agreement. Flashback, 3 years ago. The penthouse was cold. It was modern, all glass and steel, overlooking Central Park. Julian had just come home from a business trip to Tokyo. Elena had made dinner, a roast chicken with herbs, his favorite. "I'm thinking of expanding into the Asian market," Julian said, loosening his tie. He didn't look at her. He rarely looked at her anymore. "It's a risk, but I need capital. I might need to mortgage the house." "Is that wise, Julian?" Elena asked softly. "The market is volatile right now." Julian slammed his fork down. "What would you know about the market, Elena? You sit here all day, writing your little fairy tales while I'm out there in the real world fighting wolves. Don't lecture me on economics." Elena had gone quiet. She took a sip of water. "I just meant that Vertex Global is making moves in that sector. They might crush a smaller competitor." Julian laughed. "Vertex Global? The conglomerate?" "Elena, please. You heard that name on the news, and now you think you're an analyst. Vertex doesn't care about a mid-sized logistics firm like mine." If he had looked at her then, really looked at her, he would have seen the ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "If you say so, Julian." But the real betrayal didn't happen in the boardroom. It happened in the bedroom. Flashback. 6 months ago. Elena had come home early from a writer's retreat, which Julian assumed was just her sitting in a cabin in the woods doing nothing. She walked into their apartment and saw the red stiletto heels in the hallway. They weren't hers. She walked to the bedroom door. It was ajar. She saw them. Julian and Sophia. Sophia was wearing Eleanor's silk robe. They were laughing. Not just laughing, mocking. "She's so boring, Julian," Sophia was saying, tracing a finger down his chest. "How do you stand it? She wears those awful sweaters." "It's temporary," Julian had replied, his voice callous. "She's the perfect housewife image for the investors. They like a stable family man. But once the IPO launches, Once I hit 50 million, I'm cutting her loose. She'll take half, Sophia warned. No, she won't, Julian grinned. I've got the prenup, and she has no money for a good lawyer. I'll give her crumbs, and she'll be too scared to fight. She's weak, Sophia. She's nothing without me. Elena didn't scream. She didn't burst in and throw things. She stood in the hallway, her heart turning into a block of ice. She realized then that her entire marriage had been a long con. He hadn't loved her. He had used her as a prop. She quietly backed away. She left the apartment. She sat on a park bench in the rain for 3 hours, and then she made a phone call. "Marcus," she said into the phone. "Miss Vance." The voice on the other end was immediate, sharp, and respectful. "We haven't heard from you in months. Is everything all right with the sabbatical?" "The sabbatical is over," Elena said. Her voice wasn't shaking anymore. "I need you to prepare a file. Julian Thorne, Thorne Logistics." "A buyout, Mum." "No," Elena said, watching the rain hit the pavement. "A destruction. But first, I need to let him think he's won." Back in the courtroom, present day. Julian was staring at Marcus Stone, his mind racing. Why is the head of Vanguard Legal here? "Mr. Stone," Judge Harrison said, adjusting his glasses, "you are claiming that the financial affidavit provided by Mr. Thorne is incorrect?" "Woefully incorrect, Your Honor," Marcus said smoothly. "Mr. Thorne claims his net worth is 45 million. However, he has failed to list the liabilities he is about to incur." "Liabilities?" Sophia cut in, trying to regain control. "My client has zero debt." "Not debt," Marcus corrected. "Damages for fraud and intellectual property theft." "This is absurd," Sophia yelled. "Theft from whom?" Marcus Stone smiled. It was a shark's smile. He gestured to Eleanor. "From the author of the proprietary algorithm that Thorne Logistics uses to route its ships," Marcus said. "The algorithm Mr. Thorne claims he invented, the one that made him his millions." Julian froze. His face went grey. "I wrote the code," Julian stammered. "I wrote it 5 years ago, in our living room." Elena stood up. She looked at Julian, and for the first time, the court saw the posture of a CEO, not a wife. "No, Julian," she said, her voice projecting to the back of the room. "You were watching football while I wrote the code on the laptop you made fun of. You stole my notebook. You copied the script. And because you didn't understand how it worked, you never realized I put a signature in the source code." "Lies!" Julian screamed, standing up. "She's a writer. She writes romance novels." "I do write," Elena said calmly. "I write under a pseudonym. But before I took a break to find love," she used air quotes that cut like knives, "I was and still am the majority shareholder and lead developer for Vertex Global." The gasp in the courtroom sucked the oxygen out of the air. Vertex Global, the tech giant, the company worth billions, the company that Julian had laughed about over dinner. "You," Julian pointed a shaking finger at her. "You are Evie." The world knew the founder of Vertex only as Evie, a recluse, a genius, a ghost. "Hello, Julian," Elena said. Surprise. The silence in the courtroom wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. It pressed down on Julian's chest like a physical weight. He looked at Elena, his wife, the woman who clipped coupons for laundry detergent, and tried to reconcile her with the image of EV, the shadowy figure behind the most advanced logistics software in the world. "This is a joke," Julian sputtered, his laugh sounding frantic and high-pitched. "Your Honor, this is a desperate tactic. Elena doesn't know the first thing about code. She thinks Java is just coffee." Sophia Sterling, however, wasn't laughing. Her legal instincts, usually predatory, were now screaming in alarm. She looked at Marcus Stone. Stone wasn't a prankster. He was a reaper in a 3-piece suit. If he was here, the threat was real. "Ms. Sterling," Judge Harrison said, his interest piqued for the first time in a decade. "If your client is accusing Mr. Thorne of intellectual property theft, that is a matter for a different court. However, it pertains to the division of assets. If Thorne Logistics is built on stolen property, its value is complicated." "It's not stolen," Julian roared, slamming his hand on the table. "I built it. Me. I spent nights awake while she slept." Elena walked calmly toward the witness stand, though she hadn't been called. She placed her laptop on the ledge. It was a sleek, matte black machine, with no logo, a custom build. "May I, Your Honor?" Eleanor asked. "Proceed," the judge said, waving a hand. Eleanor typed for a few seconds. The sound of her typing was fast, rhythmic, and professional. She wasn't pecking at keys, she was playing a symphony. She spun the laptop around to face the judge and Julian. "Julian," Elena said, her voice devoid of emotion, "do you recall the blackout bug of 2019? When your entire system went down for 6 hours and you lost the FedEx contract?" Julian flinched. That was a server error." "No," Elena corrected. "That was a fail-safe. I activated it." "You?" Julian blinked. "How?" "Because I have a backdoor key," Elena said. "Every line of code in Thorne Logistics' proprietary software, the Atlas Protocol, is built on the kernel of Vertex Global's Project Genesis. And in the root directory, buried under 3 million lines of code, is a digital signature." Marcus Stone stepped forward, handing a tablet to the judge. "Your Honor, if you will look at Exhibit C, this is a real-time comparison of the code Mr. Thorne claims is his, and the patent filed by my client 6 years ago." The judge adjusted his glasses, scrolling. "It looks identical." "It is," Marcus said. "Except for one thing. Mr. Thorne, could you tell the court what the variable evlovejt stands for in the login authentication sequence?" Julian froze. He had seen that variable. He had asked his dev team to remove it, but every time they tried, the whole system crashed. They had assumed it was some legacy junk code Julian had written in a drunken stupor. "It's just a variable," Julian stammered. "It stands for Elena Vance loves Julian Thorne," Elena said softly. "I wrote it the week before our wedding. I embedded it into the core architecture so that every time a ship moved, every time a package was delivered, it was powered by my love for you. It was my wedding gift. I never told you because I wanted you to feel like the big man. I wanted you to have your victory." She paused, and the sadness in her eyes hardened into ice. "But you didn't just take the gift, Julian. You tried to sell the wrapper and throw me in the trash. And now I'm taking the gift back." Elena hit the enter key on her laptop. Suddenly, Julian's phone buzzed, then Sophia's phone, then the phones of every junior banker in the gallery. Julian grabbed his phone. It was a notification from his CTO. "Urgent. System failure. All ships halted. Access denied. Password reset required by admin." "What did you do?" Julian screamed, his face turning purple. "Undo it. You're destroying my company." "Not your company," Elena said coolly. "Mine. I just revoked your license to use my software. As of 30 seconds ago, Thorne Logistics is nothing but a fleet of empty trucks and confused captains. You have no routing, no tracking, no business." Sophia Sterling stood up, trembling. "Your Honor, this is corporate sabotage. I demand she be arrested." Marcus Stone chuckled darkly. "Sabotage? My client merely updated the terms of service. Mr. Thorne never paid the licensing fee for the software. He was on a family plan. Since he is dissolving the family." Marcus shrugged. "The plan is cancelled." The courtroom erupted. The reporters in the back were furiously typing on their phones. This was the story of the century. Billionaire genius hides as housewife, destroys cheating husband in court. Julian slumped into his chair. He looked at Sophia, begging for an answer, a loophole, anything. But Sophia was busy distancing herself, physically inching her chair away from him. "But," Julian whispered, his voice broken, "the money. I still have the money. The accounts in the Caymans, the liquid cash." Marcus Stone shook his head. "Ah, the money. That brings us to the prenuptial agreement. The one you insisted on, Mr. Thorne." To understand the magnitude of Julian's mistake, you have to peel back the layers of Eleanor's life. Eleanor Vance was born into money, but not the kind Julian chased. She was born into old money, the kind that whispers rather than shouts. But she hated the socialite life. She hated the charity galas where people smiled with their teeth, but not their eyes. She was a prodigy. She started coding at 6. By 16, she had built an AI that predicted stock market trends with 94% accuracy. By 22, she founded Vertex Global. But with success came isolation. Everyone wanted something. Men dated her for her portfolio. Friends befriended her for connections. She became paranoid. She became lonely. So, she created Elena the Writer. A persona. A test. When she met Julian, she thought she had finally found someone who didn't care about status. He seemed passionate, driven, and, crucially, he had no idea who she was. When he paid for her coffee that first day, even though he was broke, she fell in love. She wanted to be normal. She wanted to cook dinner and complain about the weather and fold laundry. She wanted to be cherished for herself, not her net worth. But over the years, she watched Julian change. The money she secretly funneled into his business, under the guise of anonymous angel investors, didn't make him grateful. It made him arrogant. He started treating waiters poorly. He stopped asking about her day. He started mocking her small life, never realizing that her small life was a deliberate constraint she placed on herself to fit into his world. Flashback. 2 years ago. They were at a party for Thorne Logistics. Julian was holding court, a glass of scotch in hand. Elena stood by his side, wearing a simple black dress. "This is my wife, Elena." Julian introduced her to a potential client. "She keeps the home fires burning. Don't ask her about logistics, though. She thinks a supply chain is a type of jewelry." The men laughed. Elena smiled, a tight, painful smile. Later that night in the car, she tried to talk to him. "Julian, why do you belittle me in front of them?" "I'm not belittling you, babe." He sighed, checking his emails. "I'm managing expectations. They need to see me as the alpha. Having a strong, dominant wife doesn't fit the brand. You're the soft place to land. Be happy with that. Be happy with that." That was the moment the love started to die. But the hope remained, until the affair with Sophia. That was the final nail. Back in the courtroom. Marcus Stone picked up the prenuptial agreement, holding it with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. "Mr. Thorne," Marcus began, "you were very specific about this document. You wanted to ensure that what is mine, and what is yours is yours. You also included a rigid infidelity clause. Clause 14, Section C, if either party is found to have engaged in extramarital affairs, all jointly held assets, and any appreciation of marital assets revert to the injured party." Sophia's eyes went wide. She knew that clause. She had drafted it. She had drafted it because Julian was convinced Elena would cheat on him with some starving artist type. "We have proof of the affair," Marcus said, dropping a thick envelope on the table. Photos, hotel receipts, text messages, some quite descriptive. Julian looked at the envelope. He didn't need to open it. He knew what was inside. So, Marcus continued, under the terms of your prenup, since the appreciation of Thorne Logistics occurred during the marriage, and you are at fault, Mrs. Thorne is entitled to 100% of the marital assets, including the company, including the penthouse, including the accounts in the Caymans. No, Julian rasped. The prenup protects pre-marital assets. Correct, Marcus smiled. But you started the marriage with debt, Mr. Thorne. All your wealth was generated during the marriage. It is all marital property, and you just forfeited it. Julian looked at Sophia. Do something. You're the shark. Bite them. Sophia stood up slowly. She looked at the judge, then at Marcus Stone, then at Eleanor. She saw the power dynamic shift. She saw the end of her career if she went down with this ship. Your Honor, Sophia said, her voice shaking. I request a recess. I need to confer with my client regarding a conflict of interest. Conflict of interest? Julian screamed. You're sleeping with me. That's the conflict. The gallery gasped. The court reporter stopped typing, mouth open. Julian realized too late what he had just admitted on public record. Elena laughed. It was a soft, genuine laugh. Oh, Julian, you always were your own worst enemy. The recess was denied. Judge Harrison looked like he was watching his favorite movie and refused to pause it. Mr. Thorne has admitted to the affair on record, Judge Harrison stated dryly. The clause is activated. But we still have the issue of the settlement. Elena stepped forward again. She didn't look at Julian. She looked at the judge. Your Honor, I don't want his money, she said. Julian's head snapped up. You don't? I have billions, Julian, she said dismissively. Your 45 million is a rounding error in my tax returns. I don't need your penthouse. I own the building it's in. I bought it last week through a shell company just to evict you. Julian turned pale. You bought the building? I don't want your cash, Elena repeated. But I do want justice, and I want to make sure you never do this to another woman again. She turned to Sophia. Ms. Sterling, Elena said. I know about the bribes. Sophia froze. I beg your pardon. The bribes you paid to the zoning commissioner to get Julian's warehouse approved in Jersey, Elena said. I have the emails. I recovered them from Julian's server when I locked him out. Sophia grabbed her briefcase. I am leaving. I am withdrawing as counsel. Sit down, Miss Sterling, Judge Harrison barked. Bailiff, bar the doors. Elena continued, her voice relentless. I am pressing charges for corporate espionage, fraud and bribery. But I am willing to make a deal. The room held its breath. What deal? Julian asked, his voice a whimper. Total surrender, Elena said. You sign over Thorne Logistics to me unconditionally. You admit to the intellectual property theft publicly, and you, she pointed at Sophia, you surrender your law license voluntarily. Never, Sophia shrieked. I worked 20 years for this. Then I release the emails to the Bar Association and the district attorney, Elena said calmly. And you go to prison. Your choice. Julian looked at his hands. He thought about the reputation he had built, the magazine covers, the interviews where he bragged about his genius. If I sign, Julian asked, tears leaking from his eyes, what do I get? Do I get to keep the apartment? The car? Elena walked up to him. She leaned in close, so only he could hear. You get to keep your freedom, Julian. You don't go to jail for stealing my code. You walk out of here with the clothes on your back. That is my generosity. That is the soft place to land you wanted. Julian looked at the Brioni suit he was wearing. It was the last expensive thing he would ever own. He picked up the pen. His hand shook so badly he could barely write. He signed the papers Marcus pushed toward him. Sophia, seeing Julian capitulate, realized she had no shield. She slumped into her chair, covering her face with her hands. "I'll sign," she whispered. Judge Harrison banged the gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. "Judgment for the defendant," the judge declared. "The assets are transferred. The court is adjourned." But the story wasn't over. As Julian walked out of the courtroom, dazed and broken, he expected the cameras to be on him. He expected the paparazzi. But they weren't looking at him. They were swarming Eleanor. "Evie! Evie! Over here! Is it true you're launching a new satellite grid? Why did you hide for so long?" Eleanor stopped on the courthouse steps. She put on a pair of dark sunglasses. She looked like a queen. She looked at the cameras, and then she looked back at Julian, who was standing alone by a trash can, trying to hail a cab that wouldn't stop for him. "I hid," Elena said to the reporters, her voice amplified by a dozen microphones, "because I wanted to see who people were when they thought nobody was watching. And now I've seen enough." She walked toward a waiting black limousine. The driver opened the door. It wasn't just a driver. It was the CEO of Vertex Global, her second-in-command, bowing to her. Julian watched the limo drive away. He checked his phone. His bank app was still open. Balance. He looked up at the sky. It started to rain. 3 months later. The radiator in the studio apartment hissed and clanked, spitting out a few drops of rusty water onto the linoleum floor. It was the only sound in the room. Julian Thorne sat on the edge of a mattress that smelled faintly of mildew. He was wearing a t-shirt that had once been white, but was now greyed from cheap laundromat washes. He stared at the wall. He had applied to 42 jobs in the last 30 days. Not executive jobs. Not management jobs. He had started applying for entry-level logistics coordinator positions, then shift supervisor roles. Then, finally, yesterday, he had applied to be a forklift driver at a warehouse in New Jersey. The warehouse manager, a burly man named Frank, had laughed in his face. "You're Thorne, right?" Frank had asked, looking at Julian's resume. "The guy who got sued by his own wife for stealing her code?" "It was a misunderstanding," Julian had said, his voice hollow. "A misunderstanding," Frank chuckled. "Buddy, you're radioactive. My insurance won't even let you on the floor. If Evie finds out we hired you, she'll pull our contracts. Get out of here." Radioactive. That was the word of the season. Julian had lost everything. The penthouse was gone. Elena had evicted him 48 hours after the court case. His accounts were frozen and then drained to pay legal fees and the settlement costs for the fraud investigation. His friends, the bankers, the investors, the drinking buddies, blocked his number. He had reached out to Sophia Sterling once, just once. He had found her sitting in a dive bar in Hell's Kitchen at 11:00 a.m. She looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, and she was nursing a cheap gin and tonic. She had been disbarred. The scandal had been so public, so humiliating, that no firm in the country would touch her. She was currently working as a paralegal for a bail bondsman, making $15 an hour. "Sophia." Julian had approached her table. She looked up. Her eyes were bloodshot. She didn't look at him with love or even lust. She looked at him with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You," she spat. "You ruined my life." "We ruined it together," Julian whispered. "No." Sophia stood up, swaying slightly. "I was a shark. I was at the top of the food chain. Then I met you, and your ego dragged me to the bottom of the ocean. Do you know what they call me now?" The Thorn Fool. Get away from me, Julian. If I see you again, I'll scream. Julian had walked out of the bar and never looked back. Now, sitting in his cold apartment, he checked his phone. It was an old model he had bought at a pawn shop after selling his iPhone. He had one notification. It was a news alert. Vertex Global announces revolutionary green shipping initiative. CEO EV makes rare public appearance. Julian's thumb hovered over the link. He shouldn't click it. It was torture. But he couldn't help himself. He tapped the screen. A video played. It was Eleanor. She was standing on a stage in Geneva, Switzerland. She looked breathtaking. She was wearing a structured white suit that made her look like a modern-day angel. Her hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders. She was smiling, a genuine, radiant smile he hadn't seen in years. "We believe," Elena was saying to the applause of thousands, "that technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. That is why Vertex is pledging $1 billion to ocean cleanup efforts." The crowd roared. Julian watched the screen, tears streaming down his face. He remembered the nights she used to ask him to read her drafts. He remembered how he would roll his eyes and tell her he was too busy building an empire. He had been building a sand castle. She had been building a mountain. He scrolled down to the comment section. User 123. "She's an inspiration." User 456. "Can you believe her ex-husband cheated on her? What an idiot." User 789. "He fumbled the bag of the century." Julian threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and cracked. He buried his face in his hands. The worst part wasn't the poverty. He could handle being poor. He had been poor before. The worst part was the knowledge, the absolute, crushing certainty that he had held a diamond in his hands and treated it like a piece of glass. 5 years later. The alarm clock on the floor buzzed with a violent, rattling sound that vibrated against the peeling linoleum. It was 5:30 a.m. Julian Thorne rolled over on the mattress that lay directly on the floor. He didn't have a bed frame. He had sold the last decent piece of furniture he owned, a mahogany nightstand he'd managed to smuggle out of the penthouse 6 months ago to pay for a root canal. He stared at the ceiling. There was a water stain there that looked like a map of a country that didn't exist. This was his kingdom now, a 300-square-foot basement studio in a crumbling building in Queens, smelling perpetually of damp concrete and boiled cabbage from the neighbor upstairs. He sat up, his joints popping. At 42, Julian felt 60. The stress of the last 5 years had aged him faster than time ever could. His hair, once a thick, glossy chestnut that cost $200 a month to style, was now thinning and grey at the temples. His face was gaunt, the sharp jawline that had once graced the cover of Business Weekly, now hidden under the stubble of a man who was trying to save money on razor blades. He stood up and walked to the small sink in the corner. He splashed cold water on his face. He didn't look in the mirror. He hadn't looked in a mirror properly in years. He couldn't bear to see the ghost staring back. Today was Sunday. It was the only day he didn't have to report to Miller's Hardware and Supply. It was a cruel joke of the universe that Julian Thorne, the former CEO of Thorne Logistics, a man who had once commanded a fleet of supertankers and cargo jets, now spent 6 days a week stocking shelves with screws, bolts, and PVC pipes. He wore a red vest with a name tag that simply said Julian. Most of the customers treated him like he was invisible. The ones who did see him usually complained that he was too slow. But Sunday was his day of penance. He dressed with care. He put on the one good outfit he had saved from the purge. A charcoal wool coat that was fraying slightly at the cuffs, a clean white shirt that he ironed meticulously on the floor, and his old leather boots. They were scuffed, but they were quality. They were the only things that reminded him of who he used to be. He took the subway into Manhattan. The train was crowded, loud and dirty, a far cry from the tinted windows of the Maybach he used to be chauffeured in. He stood in the corner, holding the metal pole, watching the city blur by. He got off at 59th Street and walked toward Central Park. It was late October, the season of dying things. The city was dressed in a funeral garb of gold, crimson, and burnt orange. The air was crisp and bit at his exposed skin, smelling of roasted nuts and exhaust fumes, the perfume of New York. Julian walked his usual route. He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact. He lived in constant fear of being recognized, though it rarely happened anymore. The scandal had been the talk of the town for a year, but the city had a short memory. To the world, Julian Thorne was just a cautionary tale, a footnote in the biography of the great E.V. Eleanor Vance. He found his bench near the Bethesda fountain. It was a spot that offered a view of the lake and the boathouse. In his previous life, he and Elena had eaten dinner at that boathouse once. He remembered complaining that the service was too slow. He remembered checking his phone the entire time. He remembered Elena looking at him with those soft, hopeful hazel eyes, asking if he wanted to go for a walk afterward. He had said no. He had said he had a conference call. God, he thought, gripping his cold paper cup of coffee. If I could go back to that night, I would throw the phone in the lake. I would walk with her until our feet bled. He sat there for an hour, watching the tourists. He watched young couples holding hands, oblivious to how fragile their happiness was. He watched fathers throwing frisbees to their sons. That always stung the most. The fathers. Julian had wanted a son. It was the one thing he had spoken about constantly during the marriage. He wanted an heir. Someone to carry the name. Someone to take over the empire. He had blamed Elena for their lack of children, accusing her of being too stressed, too focused on her little hobbies. It wasn't her, he realized now, watching a dad tie his daughter's shoe. It was the stress I put her under, the loneliness. The body knows when it isn't safe to bring a life into the world. The wind picked up, swirling a vortex of dry leaves around his boots. He checked his watch. It was a cheap plastic digital watch he'd bought at a drugstore. 11:30 a.m. Time to go back to the hole in Queens before the subway got too crowded. He stood up to leave, and that was when the universe decided to twist the knife one last time. At first, he thought it was a hallucination. He saw a woman walking down the path about 50 yards away. The way she moved, it was unmistakable. It was a glide, a confident, graceful stride that commanded the space around her without demanding it. She was wearing a long, camel-colored cashmere coat that looked impossibly soft. A silk scarf with a geometric pattern, Vertex Global colors, he noted with a pang, was wrapped loosely around her neck. Her hair, a rich, dark chocolate brown, was blown out in loose waves that caught the autumn sunlight. Eleanor. Julian's heart slammed against his ribs like a trapped bird. His breath hitched. He wanted to run. He wanted to hide behind the tree. He didn't want her to see him like this, broken, poor, a shell of a man. But he couldn't move. His feet were rooted to the pavement. He was paralyzed by a cocktail of shame and desperate, starving longing. She looked magnificent. Not just rich. She looked whole. The hunch in her shoulders from their marriage was gone. Her head was held high. She was laughing at something, her face turned slightly to the side, and the sound drifted on the wind. It was the melody he had tried to silence for years, and now it was the only song he wanted to hear. "Wait up, Mum!" The voice was high, clear, and full of energy. Julian's eyes snapped down. Running ahead of Eleanor was a boy. He was small, perhaps 4 years old, bundled up in a navy blue puffer jacket, and a knitted grey beanie. He was holding a large, dried maple leaf in his hand like a treasure. "Look at this one! It's giant!" the boy shouted, spinning around. Elena laughed, speeding up her pace to catch him. "Careful, Leo! Don't trip!" Leo. The name hit Julian like a physical blow to the stomach. Leo. Julian's grandfather's name was Leo. He had told Eleanor that once, years ago, on one of their first dates. He had told her, "If I ever have a son, I want to name him Leo. It means lion. Strong." Eleanor had remembered. Julian felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him dizzy. He did the math, though he didn't want to. It had been exactly 5 years and 3 months since the divorce was finalized. If the boy was 4, that meant Elena was pregnant during the trial. She had sat in that courtroom, listening to Sophia humiliate her, listening to Julian call her a parasite, all while carrying his child. She had dismantled his company, evicted him, and destroyed his reputation, protecting the life inside her from the toxicity of his father. "Oh my God," Julian whispered, his voice cracking. Tears, hot and stinging, welled up in his eyes, blurring his vision. The boy, Leo, stopped running. He had spotted a squirrel darting up the trunk of a massive oak tree near the bench where Julian stood. "Mummy, look! He's so fast!" Leo squealed, pointing with a gloved hand. The boy ran toward the tree, toward Julian. Elena followed, her eyes on her son, a smile lighting up her face. "I see him, baby. Stay close, okay?" Leo stopped just a few feet away from Julian. He looked up at the squirrel, mesmerized. Then, sensing a presence, he turned his head. For the first time, Julian looked into the face of his son. It was like looking into a time machine. The boy had Julian's chin, that stubborn, slightly cleft chin. He had Julian's dark, unruly hair. But his eyes were Eleanor's. They were deep hazel, flecked with green and gold, filled with an intelligence and kindness that Julian had never possessed. The boy stared at Julian with innocent curiosity. He didn't see a disgraced CEO. He didn't see a failure. He just saw a man in a coat. "Hi," Leo said, holding up his leaf. "Look what I found." Julian's throat closed up. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He wanted to fall to his knees. He wanted to hug the boy. He wanted to say, "I'm your daddy. I'm the lion." "Leo," Elena's voice came from behind. It was sharp now, protective. "Leo, come here." Julian lifted his eyes. Elena had stopped 10 feet away. She had seen him. The silence that fell between them was heavier than the skyscrapers looming over the park. The ambient noise of the city, the traffic, the distant sirens, the chatter of tourists, seemed to fade into a dull hum, leaving only the sound of Julian's pounding heart. Elena didn't gasp. She didn't scream. She didn't look afraid. She looked at him with a gaze that was terrifyingly calm. She scanned him from head to toe. She took in the fraying cuffs of his coat. She saw the grey in his hair. She saw the cheap boots. She saw the misery etched into the lines around his mouth. She saw the ruin of the man who had tried to break her. "Elena," Julian choked out. His voice was a rusty whisper. He took a single, trembling step forward. "Elena, is he—" He pointed a shaking finger at Leo, who was now clutching Elena's coat, sensing the tension. "Is he mine?" Julian pleaded. "Please tell me." Elena placed a hand on Leo's shoulder, pulling him slightly behind her. It was a subtle movement, but it spoke volumes. "You cannot touch him. You cannot have him." She looked Julian dead in the eye. In that moment, Julian hoped for anger. Anger meant she still cared. Anger meant there was still a connection, however volatile. He would have taken screaming. He would have taken insults. But there was no anger in Eleanor's eyes. There was only pity. Cold, distant pity. The kind of pity you feel for a wounded animal on the side of the road that is too far gone to save. "Come on, Leo," Eleanor said, her voice steady and soft, turning her attention back to the boy. "We're going to be late for lunch with Uncle Marcus." "Uncle Marcus is bringing me a robot," Leo cheered, the tension breaking for him instantly. Julian flinched. Marcus Stone, his lawyer, the man who had destroyed him in court, was now playing uncle to his son. The irony was a poison in his veins. "Elena, wait!" Julian desperation surged, overriding his shame. He took another step. "You can't just... He's my son. I have a right." Elena stopped. She didn't turn her body, but she turned her head. She fixed him with a stare so sharp it felt like it cut through his soul. "You lost your rights," she said, her voice low enough that Leo couldn't hear, but loud enough to shatter Julian. "You signed them away for a settlement check you no longer have." "I didn't know!" Julian cried, tears spilling down his cheeks now, unashamed. "I didn't know about him. If I knew, if you knew," Elena cut him off, "you would have used him. You would have used him as leverage to keep your money. You would have taught him that people are objects to be owned. You would have turned him into you." She looked down at Leo, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead, with infinite tenderness. "He is kind," she whispered. "He is generous. He is happy. And he is going to stay that way." "Who is he, Mummy?" Leo asked, tugging on her sleeve, looking back at the crying man in the grey coat. "Why is the man sad?" Julian held his breath. This was it. The moment of truth. He waited for her to tell the boy who he was. He waited for the door to open, just a crack. Elena looked at Julian one last time. She looked at the wreckage of her past, and then she made a choice. She looked down at her son and smiled a reassuring, bright smile. "That's no one, sweetheart," she said clearly. "Just a stranger. Just a stranger." The words echoed in Julian's head, louder than any gavel, louder than any scream. They were the final verdict. Elena turned her back on him. She took Leo's hand, and they began to walk away, down the path lined with golden trees, toward a future that had no space for him. "Bye, stranger." Leo waved his little hand, innocent and cheerful. Julian raised his hand weakly, a reflex. "Bye, Leo," he whispered. He stood there for a long time. He watched them until they were just specks in the distance, until they disappeared into the crowd of happy families. The wind bit through his threadbare coat. He suddenly felt very cold, and very, very old. He looked down at his hands. They were empty. He had spent his life grasping for gold, for status, for power. He had held a diamond in his hands, a woman who loved him, a genius who supported him, and he had thrown it away because he wanted to be the big man. And now he was exactly what she said he was. He was a stranger to his own life. Julian Thorne sat back down on the bench. He didn't go home to the damp basement. He just sat there, watching the leaves fall, one by one, covering the ground in a blanket of dead gold. He realized then that he wasn't just poor. He was destitute in the only way that mattered. His legacy wasn't the company he lost. It was the boy walking away from him. He buried his face in his hands and wept, his shoulders shaking as the indifferent city moved on around him. And that is where we leave Julian Thorne. Not in a jail cell, but in a prison of his own making. A prison without bars, where the punishment is seeing exactly what his arrogance cost him. It's a brutal ending, isn't it? But it's a necessary one. Julian's story is a powerful reminder that the assets that truly matter in life aren't listed on a balance sheet. They are the people who stand by you when you have nothing. They are the moments of quiet connection, They are the family you build with love, not leverage. Julian thought he was the king, and Elena was just a pawn, but he forgot the most important rule of the game. The queen is the most powerful piece on the board, and if you fail to protect her, she has the power to take everything, including your legacy. He wanted an heir more than anything in the world, and in a twist of poetic justice, he got one. A beautiful, intelligent son who will grow up to be a billionaire, a visionary, and a good man. But he will do it all without ever knowing his father's name. So here is my question to you. Do you think Elena was right to hide the child? Was it an act of protection, or was it an act of revenge? Did Julian deserve to know, despite everything he did? I want to see your debates in the comment section below. If this story touched your heart, or if the twist left you shocked, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Remember, be careful who you hurt today, for they may be holding your future in their hands tomorrow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.